NATO countries have called for the de-escalation of renewed violence in Syria, urging the protection of civilians and humanitarian infrastructure. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz arrived in Ukraine only weeks before he's set to ask his parliament for a vote of no confidence he is widely expected to lose. Scholz promised the war-torn country an additional aid package worth €650 million at a time of escalating Russian attacks. The German leader's approach to Ukraine has come under criticism, primarily due to his refusal to send powerful cruise missiles to Kyiv, as he argues it would risk Germany becoming directly involved in the conflict. Ukraine's ambassador to Germany called Scholz's refusal to send the weapons a blank check for the Russians. Scholz drew further criticism in November after he spoke on the telephone with Russian President Vladimir Putin, a call Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said undermined international efforts to isolate Russia.
Russia says it's captured 2 towns in the Donetsk region of eastern Ukraine, just as President Vladimir Putin approved plans to raise military spending to its highest level yet, a third of the national budget. According to the Ministry of Defense, its servicemen also hit the infrastructure of Ukrainian airfields, drone assembly shops and warehouses. Ukraine's Air Force confirmed the attacks, saying Russia launched 78 drones overnight from the cities of Kursk, Orel and Bryansk. The Air Force also said it jammed about 32 of the drones, whilst regional authorities said at least 11 civilians were killed from the Russian strikes. Meanwhile, authorities in the Kherson region say 3 people were killed in a Russian strike there. It's one of 4 regions that Moscow illegally annexed in September 2022, but hasn't been able to completely reoccupy. A Ukrainian counteroffensive recaptured western areas of the Kherson region, including the regional capital, also called Kherson, 9 months later.
Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi makes a visit to the Syrian capital Damascus to meet President Bashar Assad. His visit comes as Syria's army launched counterattacks on Sunday to repel insurgents who've seized control of Aleppo and areas in Idlib in a surprise offensive on Wednesday. Pro-Assad media say government forces had killed nearly 1,000 insurgents over the past 3 days, but no proof was provided to support those claims. The Syrian Civil Defense, a humanitarian group on the ground in opposition-controlled areas, say at least 18 people were killed in Sunday's attacks. They say dozens more were injured as they accuse the Syrian regime of carrying out joint airstrikes with Russian forces.
We are at a very critical situation. With the latest offensive from the rebels, we have seen a renewal of the civil war, and of course this is first and foremost has a negative impact on the civilian population.
Iran's top diplomat is set to visit Ankara on Monday to meet his Turkish counterpart and discuss the escalation. The UN urges all parties involved to prioritize political processes and avoid further destabilizing the region.
Germany, France, the UK and the US have called for de-escalation of violence in Syria after rebels marched on government-controlled areas, reigniting violence in the 13-year-long conflict. In a joint statement, the NATO countries urged the protection of civilians and infrastructure to prevent further displacement and the disruption of humanitarian aid. An alliance of Syrian rebel groups seized control of Aleppo over the weekend, with Syrian President Bashar Assad announcing a subsequent counter-offensive. Syrian state television claimed government forces had killed nearly 1,000 insurgents over the past few days without providing evidence. The surge in violence comes at a time of high political turmoil in the Middle East, with Israel waging war against Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon. Renewed violence in Syria risks involving more regional powers into the conflict. Both Russia and Turkey have their own interests to protect, with both sides offering support to opposing groups in the country.
A 4th consecutive night of protests is underway across Georgia against the government's decision to suspend European Union accession talks. Officials say at least 44 people have been hospitalized in increasingly violent clashes between police and protesters. Prime Minister Irakli Kobesidze has warned that everyone in the country has to obey the law.
მინდა ყველას მოუწოდოს მშვიდისა და კანონის დაცვისკენ. ყველას შევახსენებ, რომ ნებისმიერ სამართალდარღვევას კანონის მთელი სიმკაცრით გაეცემა პასუხი. პასუხისმგებლობას ვერ გაექცევიან ვერც ის პოლიტიკოსები, რომლებიც თვითონ ოფისებში იმალებიან და მათი ძალადობრივი დაჯგუფებების წევრებს მძიმე საშელისთვის წირავენ.
The unrest began 4 days ago when the government, headed by the populist Georgian Dream Party, announced it was suspending EU accession talks until at least 2028. That was in response to a European Parliament resolution which criticised the 26th of October parliamentary elections, which saw the Georgian Dream re-elected as neither free nor fair. The EU granted Georgia candidate status in December 2023, but put that process on hold earlier this year after the passage of a controversial foreign influence law, widely seen as a blow to democratic freedoms. Meanwhile, Kobesidze has said President Salome Zurabishvili must vacate her post when her mandate ends later this month. The pro-EU head of state has vowed to stay on to support the protesters and says the illegitimate government has no authority to select her successor.
The elections that led to this parliament and then to the government are not legitimate. They are not recognized by anyone. They have not been recognized by the Georgian population in the first place. They have not been recognized by the political forces in the country.
Zurabishvili also said Russia had carried out what she called an electoral war on Georgia and had done the same in recent elections in Romania and Moldova. Ireland's two main centre-right parties look set to form the country's next government as the final results from the general election trickle in. But both Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil took a reduced vote share and face complex coalition negotiations to put the new administration together. Public broadcaster RTE reports 153 seats in the 174-seat lower house of Parliament have been called. Fianna Fáil have taken 40, with Fine Gael winning 33.
Well, I think there is a very clear route back to government, although it's not fully determined, because a lot will depend on those final seats that I've spoken about.
But what I am very confident about is that my party will have a very significant role to play in the years ahead, and I'm cautiously optimistic and excited about what the weeks ahead hold.
In second place is the left of centre Sinn Féin with 34 seats, but it may struggle to find partners willing to form a coalition with it. Both Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have previously said they wouldn't work with the party, citing its leftist policies and historic links with the IRA.
I understand that that vote was for a change in government. And I and we will do everything that we can once the voting's finished and the seats are filled to pursue that goal.
The cost of living and Ireland's housing crisis were dominant topics in the three-week election campaign. Immigration was also a key issue in the country of 5.4 million people. The results of the election mean Ireland has partly bucked the global trend of incumbents being rejected by disgruntled voters.
Romania's future parliament and government will continue the country's strong pro-EU, pro-NATO and pro-Ukraine national strategy. The leftist Social Democratic Party has won almost 23% of the vote and have an almost 5% advantage over their closest contenders. And while they've topped the polls for a second consecutive election, far-right populists have made considerable gains. The Alliance for the Unity of Romanians won the second most votes, sitting at just over 18%.
But the scores of the pro-EU camp show that the future parliamentary majority and government will continue Romania's pro-West course as NATO's eastern flank main country. But the rise of the ultra-nationalist parties is a sobering reality for Romania's political scene. A strong turnout in voting is a result of the shock result of the first round of the presidential election. Monday morning, we will find out the official results. Vitalie Cojocari, Euronews Romania.
Iceland's Social Democrats have won the largest share of votes in Saturday's parliamentary election. With all votes tallied on Sunday, the center-left party more than doubled its total number of seats, unseating the ruling coalition of the past 7 years. Its leader, Kristrún Frostadóttir, is among the favorites to become prime minister, vowing to tackle a cost of living crisis through the Nordic welfare model. Icelanders voted Saturday after disagreements over immigration, energy policy, and the economy forced the country's prime minister to call an early election. All the parties in the governing coalition saw their seat count decline, with the Left Greens losing all 8 of its parliamentary seats. While counting was delayed in some areas by snowstorms, election turnout was high by international standards, with 80% of registered voters casting ballots.
US President Joe Biden pardoned his son Hunter, sparing him a possible prison sentence for federal gun and tax convictions and reversing his past promises not to use the powers of the presidency for the benefit of his family members. In a statement, Joe Biden said the prosecution of his son was politically motivated and a miscarriage of justice. He alleged that no reasonable person could look at the facts of the case without concluding that Hunter was singled out for being his son. The Democratic president had previously publicly said he would not pardon his son or commute his sentence after his convictions in 2 cases in Delaware and California. Hunter Biden was convicted of purchasing a gun when prosecutors said he lied on a form by claiming he was not illegally using or addicted to drugs. US President-elect Donald Trump called the pardon an abuse and miscarriage of justice.